When it was first announced that D&D Beyond and Wizards of the Coast were finally joining forces and D&D Beyond was falling under the umbrella of WotC, there was a lot of speculation as to what we as consumers would get out of that deal. And I kind of speculated that I thought we would get more digital content, things straight from Wizards of the Coast that were exclusively available, or at least initially available, only digitally. And this is great. We got the first chapter of the Radiant Citadel. Just got it. No leak. No nothing. Wizards were just like, here you go. Get hyped, nerds. So today I'm going to be talking about that, looking at the first chapter and giving my thoughts and the information contained with it to you all. So if you don't want to go through and read all of it, you don't have to, but I would recommend it. But after you watch this video. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric. And like I said, today we are looking at Chapter 1 of the Radiant Citadel, the next book that's being released by Wizards of the Coast. And let's jump into it. So Chapter 1 contains our overview of the Radiant Citadel, what the Radiant Citadel is, kind of the power structures, the various features of it. And yeah, it's great. I really like the setting so far. I like the groundwork they've laid. There are some components that I'm hoping to see more of as we get the entire book, but let's jump into it. The first thing that I noted when looking at this chapter was the scale of the Radiant Citadel. It hadn't really fully sunk in when you talk about the Auroral Diamond being the centerpiece of the Citadel, with a bunch of different cultures and organizations and people and districts, how huge especially the diamond was. And it is massive. And you get some really interesting information about the Auroral Diamond. It can change colors, and it kind of powers the whole city. It is the power source for the city. We also have the Court of Whispers, which is the marketplace of rumors and information and ideas, and even like the speakers of the ancestors, or the speakers for the ancestors, will send agents into the Court of Whispers to figure out what people are talking about, what the rumors in the Citadel are, where popular opinions are shifting to. And so I like that they have this kind of this pot of information that is codified in the setting of, like, if you want to know things, here's where people go to talk and make deals and exchange information and all this kind of stuff. We also get information on the House of Convalescence, which is the house of healing for the Radiant Citadel. Two very notable aspects of the House of Convalescence because of the Auroral Diamond. Firstly, the diamond component needed for things like Raise Dead, Resurrection, Revivify, True Resurrection. You don't need it because the Auroral Diamond counts as the material component for the spell. So if you need to revive somebody, it behooves you, unless you're high level and you've gotten the diamond component that you need, to return back to the Citadel, because you can do these things without needing to scrounge around for that gold and then track down somebody that owns a diamond that size that's willing to sell it. And also, when you would roll for a healing spell, you just take the maximum. So 2d6, you just get 12. So kind of showing the power of the Auroral Diamond, especially when it comes to healing. And what I like about this is if you're running a campaign in the Radiant Citadel, especially if you're going with the party members are members of the Shield Bearers, which we'll get into them in a second, or just another organization that resides in the Radiant Citadel, or they just utilize the Radiant Citadel as a hub to travel around. Having components like this really give a tangible incentive for the party to return to home base and not just continue going around it. Like, we could heal here, but we'll have to roll for it, and so we're not going to get as much healing. But if we go back, then we'll get our max hit points, or the maximum for the spell, restored. And so it provides a little bit of that incentive. And then if somebody dies, you obviously have the diamond component that is taken care of with a lot of those resurrection spells. The Keening Gloam is the creepy ethereal cyclone that surrounds the Radiant Citadel, and like howls and screams come from it. Anything that enters the Keening Gloam never returns. And that's all you get. It acknowledges that there's theories about what the Keening Gloom is or what it represents or what might happen if it gets too close to the Radiant Citadel or the Radiant Citadel moves off course or anything like that. I love, love, love unexplained mysteries in a setting. Like it just reads as a tool for the DM. Like, here's something for your campaign. Use this as a driving force. Use this as a apocalyptic event. It's one of the reasons I love Eberron so much is it's sprinkled throughout, and you get a fair amount of that in chapter 1 of Radiant Citadel. They didn't over explain everything. There's a lot of wiggle room. They provide you enough to understand and feel confident in running in the setting, but they leave enough mysteries surrounding it to where you can still play as a dungeon master and make it your own. Palace of Exile is a great element of the city. It's basically where refugees go when they need shelter, whether they are from one of the civilizations that's based out of the Radiant Citadel and they need to come and stay for a while, or if they're from another culture or civilization that finds their way to the Radiant Citadel and they need a place to lay low and be put up. This is a home for that. And I love this as a jumping off point for a campaign of like the party or just a jumping off point for the Radiant Citadel itself as a setting. You could already have the party like maybe level 5 having done some adventures. Then they find a big jewel and they get teleported to this place and they need to be holed up in the Palace of Exile for a bit while they recover and recoup. And it can give them opportunity to learn more about the Radiant Citadel as characters and as players. I think that when a lot of adventures introduce a brand new city or nation or plane or whatever, a big issue becomes that the first thing the players really need to concern themselves with is where are we staying? Like we can't just like pitch our tents in the middle of the road. We have to go find an inn. We have to go figure out how we're going to pay for it, yada, yada. Palace of Exile solves that problem in one go. As soon as they arrive, they can be told about it. Like there's a place for you to stay while you get your feet and yada, yada, yada. So I really like this as a storytelling convention of giving a solid place for the players to land in the Radiant Citadel to where they feel comfortable exploring the fun bits of the space. Preserve of the Ancestors is so fun. It's a preserve for the flora of various civilizations that are, and also insects and small birds and maybe some very small mammals where they like, it's basically for endangered or near extinct species of plants and small animals to come. And they will also bring like injured animals that need to recover a chance to rehabilitate before they're released back into the wild. And so if you have an animal lover in your group, then expect one of your players to spend a lot of time in the Preserve of the Ancestors. It's great. I love the attention to detail that so many aspects of this setting have, and having the Preserve of the Ancestors is definitely one that I really, really, really like. Oh, and this is also where we're first introduced to the Incarnates, but we get more information on them later in the chapter, so I'm going to save discussing them for their section later on. The Trade Discal is the massive marketplace that I think we see on the cover of the Radiant Citadel book, at least in the previews that we've seen. And it's a hub of all these different cultures and the goods and animals and ores and all these things from different civilizations and cultures being traded. And it's such a vital outlet for the Radiant Citadel because they like charge tariffs on importing goods, and they also make money off of selling those goods and exporting them. And the book specifically calls out that adventurers are often hired to accompany and oversee the transport of these commodities to and from the Citadel. And so that is great low level adventuring fodder, in my opinion. Being hired to accompany a caravan of goods is classic fantasy, but this has a fun twist in that you're doing it on a city floating in the ethereal plane and you're transporting it to and from these other civilizations. So it's a fun twist. It may very well be that once we get this full book, one of the adventures is based around that concept. We shall see. But that jumped out at me as like, yes, like there are so many tenets of classic high fantasy storytelling, but with fun and interesting twists put on them to make them feel unique. We also get some art in the next section where it talks about the Concord Jewels. that once again really provide a sense of scale of the city, because also the Auroral Diamond basically sits at an angle like this, and rather than the Radiant Citadel being like a singular disc around it, it's a spiral, so it like goes down and back up, obviously, because it's a spiral, the Auroral Diamond. So you get a lot more scale and a lot more depth to the Citadel than what I think people initially thought when we read about what the Radiant Citadel was. And then we get some information about the Concord Jewels, which are the means of transport to and from the Citadel, the, I guess, main means of transport to and from the Citadel. And there's one Concord Jewel for each civilization that is tied to the Radiant Citadel. But we have quite a few missing civilizations. So there are a lot of Concord Jewels out there, which when Ajit was on the channel here, when he came on and talked about it, he referenced, that's a great introductory point. If you have a setting that you play in, like I play in Eberron a lot, and you want to introduce the Radiant Citadel, have the adventurers find the Concord Jewel for Eberron that connects it to the Radiant Citadel, and now all of a sudden you can connect this new setting with your favorite setting, whether it's Faerun, Eberron, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Blackmoor, whatever. So it gives you a lot in terms of that flexibility. And if you want to connect worlds, if I'm running an Eberron campaign, but I'm like, it might be fun just like doing an arc in Faerun, like let's go Forgotten Realms for a bit, then to the Radiant Citadel, and then hey, the Faerun Concord Jewel was also found, and we go down there, and then we can return back to Eberron. So this provides a very controlled means of jumping between different worlds, whereas something like Spelljammer is a lot more, chaotic. I in my estimation, in my feeling, whereas Radiant Citadel provides a very consistent means of transporting around. We get a section on life in the Citadel, and I love the nuance of this section of the book, because when we hear about this setting, we hear like hope punk, solar punk. It's a very kind of utopian-esque society that, doesn't have that doesn't have a whole lot of like energy problems, because the Auroral Diamond provides their energy, and they're all vegetarian, and at least they're not all vegetarian, but primarily vegetarian, and all these things. And it can come across as a very potentially boring setting, because excitement in adventuring is born of conflict, and the life in the Citadel section shows that while diplomacy and compromise are vital to the continuation of the Radiant Citadel, it's not an easy process, and it's not a smooth process. I love that in the art and culture section under this larger banner of life in the Citadel, it discusses how, you have all these different civilizations and cultures coming together and sharing their art and their clothing and their music. But then also you have, the sharing of that information and mixing together of that information, and food being a big thing in the Citadel, and how fusion cooking has become a huge thing with these different civilizations sharing their knowledge of food and cooking, and then people going, oh, but if we take this thing over here and this thing over here and combine them, then we get something really neat and interesting. And I love that, because it is very indicative of especially larger cities. Being in America, I speak to American cities like New York, Chicago, LA, where you have these diverse groups of people living in relatively close proximity to one another, and you see these very inventive creations, especially in the culinary world, being created, and the excitement around that. And so I love that in my D&D, and it's so fun, and yeah, I like it. That section was only like 3 sentences, but I'm here for it. And then we get sections on diplomacy and governance and politics, and how the Radiant Citadel, it functions like from a governance standpoint. And it talks about the fact that the Citadel will send diplomats abroad to the various civilizations that are a part of the Radiant Citadel, as well as other foreign governments. But the goodwill isn't always reciprocated, and so they might send aid and not get anything in return, or you might have foreign actors trying to exert their power and control over the Radiant Citadel because of how lucrative the potential for having a trade hub like this would be. And so, you know, it's a tough path to tread for the speakers for the ancestors and who govern the Radiant Citadel, of trying to maintain a adherence to their own ideologies and wanting to benefit people and help people, but do it in a way to where they're not taken advantage of, and they keep those proper boundaries. So I think that is very compelling and interesting, especially if you're going to want to run a politics heavy campaign. And it also talks about how speakers for the ancestors are selected with the Dawnincarnates, which we'll get into it. But then also how they like make new laws and make decisions by voting via majority and having to compromise with one another, and how transparent governance is and how the public are very much a part of that process, and laws are not a static thing. It's not a situation where they decided the laws when they founded the Radiant Citadel and then those are the laws and we're never changing them. It's a very they change and create new laws to meet new challenges as they come up. So yeah, it's really cool. They don't spend a lot of word count on it, but they do a good job of utilizing the word count to convey a government style that is like teeming with possibilities for adventuring and role play and social deduction and things like that. So I really like that. Then we get some insight into law enforcement and justice, and how, you know, the House of Convalescence, that is the healing subset, they're the ones that deal with, non-violent crimes and non-violent methods of detainment and helping people with mental illness, and how the more, they do have local trained guards that deal with more violent offenders. And it talks about how one of the civilizations has a very controversial punishment that the criminal is subjected to a ritual that prevents them from ever committing that crime again, and then they're banished from the city. And I think we'll get more details in the adventure for that civilization. That's all we get right now, so I'm excited to see what that ritual looks like, and that's for like the worst offenders. But it's a very tiered law enforcement style, and one that I like and I think is more interesting and compelling than, there's city guards that patrol around and deal with problems as they come up. So lifestyle and society really plays into the idealistic nature of this setting, with there being a form of universal basic income for residents of the city. House of Convalescence charges people based upon their means, with the poorest not having to pay anything. Housing is a public commodity that is distributed by the speakers for the ancestors to ensure that there's nobody that is experiencing homelessness and having to contend with that. And then additionally, because you're surrounding this diamond floating through the ethereal plane, there's not a whole lot of like pastures for like cattle to graze. So it is a primarily vegetarian society, with meat being an import, something that has to be brought in. And the speakers for the ancestors charge a particularly high tariff on that to ensure that, money is available for the Radiant Citadel as they need it. And you get some information on the taxes and tariffs of the Radiant Citadel, as I just touched on with the meat stuff, about how visitors have to pay a toll. But additionally, you can get around that toll by providing something of interest, whether it's like long forgotten knowledge or a rare piece of art, something along those lines. The Dawnincarnates, we'll get to it, can grant you access if you provide them with that. Now we have a big old section of the different groups of the Citadel. So the Dawnincarnates, well, we just have the base incarnates, which are spirits that are bound within gemstones. And they can coalesce with each other. And so you might have a small incarnate that's like in the shape of a butterfly that just flaps around, and it's just a handful of gemstones. But you have the Dawnincarnates, which have been around since the inception of the Radiant Citadel, predating the current version of the government, because the Radiant Citadel was abandoned for a time and then rediscovered. And so the Dawnincarnates predate everything else that's on the Radiant Citadel right now. And they have the knowledge of the various spirits that make up the whole of their being. That's not to say that they are like a hive mind or unified in any way. They're all individual entities that can speak up at various times, but they all retain different memories, different beats of knowledge, and people can come and petition them to grant them with knowledge. And there are Dawnincarnates for the active civilizations that are there. And so once again, we have a wonderful mystery in that there is a Dawnincarnate that is the sapphire wyvern, whose gemstones are blackened and cracked. And, scholars believe that it belongs to one of the Radiant Citadel's 12 lost civilizations that have not been discovered yet. But nobody knows what to do about it. And so, as another civilization joins, their Dawnincarnate would arrive. But we have a mystery with the sapphire wyvern. And I love a good mystery in my setting. Is that a civilization that's been utterly destroyed? And that's how you know that a civilization has been truly lost, is that its Dawnincarnate dies with it. Who knows? I don't. You don't. None of us do. So it's exciting. Another interesting thing about the Dawnincarnates, as they relate to the speaker for the ancestors, which is the council of people, one representing each active civilization in the Radiant Citadel, is the speakers have to be elected by the people that they're going to represent, their civilization. And then they have to pass a test given to them by each of the Dawnincarnates, not just the one from their civilization, to show that they truly hold the best interests of the Radiant Citadel at heart. And it might be answering questions, it might be going on quests. And so it's a really rigorous process to become a speaker for the ancestors. And the Dawnincarnates are very much involved in that process, which I think is really interesting and compelling, having all these ancient spirits assisting in the governance of this city. So the speakers for the ancestors, they hold their office for 10 years, and then they can either step down or begin the selection process again, running for re-election. If they are re-elected, they have to go through the tests of the Dawnincarnates again, because, there's a quote out there somewhere about something that absolute power does to people. I can't remember it, but they have a check and balance for that, where if you continue to be in power for so long and it changes your priorities or who you are or your interests, then maybe the Dawnincarnates don't want you to continue to be in that position of power, and maybe they give you the boot. So that is a really interesting check and balance to this role. And what they do is they represent their people, and they try to ensure that their people are treated equally and fairly under the law, while maintaining the diplomatic relationships with the other civilizations, and regulating taxes and tariffs, and the neutrality of the Radiant Citadel in all conflicts. And it's a very daunting role, it seems like, especially with there being just not that many. It's not like you have a council of hundreds. You have a council of, I think, 15, if I remember correctly, 15 speakers for the ancestors. And so things can get very intense and very personal, it feels like. And each speaker has the power to shut down the Concord Jewels, not collectively. Each one of them can do that. So effectively, while you're having these heated political debates, your opponent at any point can shut down trade to the city entirely until the situation is resolved. And nobody can turn them back on except for that speaker, or if they die, their successor. So it's not like they can just go back and forth like, I turn it off, I turn it on, I turn it off, I turn it on. That the person that turns it off has to be the one to turn it back on. So it has the potential to create these very tense negotiations, which is cool. We also get a bit of a deep dive on Sholay, the oldest speaker for the ancestor, also the one who rediscovered the Radiant Citadel. And she's been a speaker for the ancestor ever since, for 250 years, because she is an ancient brass dragon that appears as a woman. And so that's interesting and compelling to me. But you get a bit of her backstory, her personality trait, ideal, bond, flaw, that kind of thing. So we get our first kind of NPC that we get to play with. Next are the Shield Bearers as an organization. They are the rescue and relocation experts, and they go into situations where people need help and assistance, and they extract those that are in danger and only defend themselves if attacked. They cannot make the first move. They cannot be proactive. or preemptive when it comes to how they conduct themselves. They can only retaliate when they are attacked. And yeah, they are the ones that go into the most dangerous situations and try to protect people. And you get a similar breakdown of their leader, Arrayet, if that's how it's pronounced. There's many ways that this name can be pronounced, but you get his personality, his flaws, things like that. And it's a very interesting character. It's somebody that you typically, like when you think like the leader of the elite military organization, this character is not a stereotype when it comes to the person that you would expect to be in that role. Then we get a fair amount of kind of playery information, you know, how entering the Citadel works, and some legends and lore surrounding the Citadel, and adventures that can be used within the Citadel, and ultimately how to use the Citadel for your adventures. But not a whole lot of like concrete information in terms of like what the setting is, which is what I wanted to kind of break down. And, you know, this last section is kind of fun, and I would like for people to get to experience it and read it on its own, especially the legends and lore section, because there's some really fun bits in there. So that's chapter 1 of the Radiant Citadel. What do you all think? Does this make you more excited for the book? Less excited? What are your thoughts? Let me know down below in the comments section. I'm more excited for this book than ever. I really enjoyed reading through chapter 1. And I think that there's a lot of really compelling things to be done with the Radiant Citadel as an entity outside of the larger lore that the book provides. You could take a concept like a Radiant Citadel and all of the trappings of it and stick it into any setting and have a really cool kind of hub for adventures and information and trade and all this kind of stuff. So I am very hyped for the book. Let me know what you all think down below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I've been Eric, and I will see you next time.